So maybe we can kind of slowly get started. This is our um, premiere episode of Conversations on Photography for the spring season. My name is Arto Vaughn. I'm the Executive Director of Project Save Photograph Archives. We've been doing this series. We launched it last year, and it's been quite successful. We've had many types of different speakers from around the world, some of whom are photographers, some are archivists, some are artists, some are combinations of all of those. Some might be researchers. And you can go back if you'd like and to see any of those. We have them on our website. And we also have them on our YouTube channel. And we'll also be uploading today's event as well in about a week or two. We'll have it on our YouTube channel and our website. So just a really quick word about Project Save for those of you who might not be too familiar with what we do. Project Save Armenian Photograph Archives is the oldest and largest archive that is solely dedicated to photographs of the Armenian global experience. It was started in 1975, so we're nearing 50 years. We're based in the Boston area. At this point, our photographs, these are hard copy original photographs. They're not digital, they're the original photographs. They number at over around 80,000 photographs at this point, going back to approximately the late 1850s, early 1860s, and all the way to the present. Our purpose, the mission of Project Save, is the preservation and sharing of these images. In the last couple of years, we're really growing and expanding. The goal now is for the archive to be a living archive. So we're now very focused on the overall ideas of photography, what it means, what it represents, photography as an art form, photography as documentation, photography as material, objects, artifacts, and so forth, memory, all kinds of things. And because our photographs are from all over the world, at this point, Project Save is also now a very important photography archive in North America in general, because we have just so many tens of thousands of photos that not only have something to do with Armenians, but they're also photographs depicting Armenians who are immigrants. So Armenians who are Americans, Armenians who are French, Armenians who are Greek, Armenians who are Soviet, Armenians who are Ukrainian or Chinese or Argentinian. It's really quite a large and diverse collection. So in the last couple of years, with series like this, we're really opening up the archive to be much more engaging with the public and certainly beyond New England. In keeping with that, our website is also brand new. We launched a new website just a couple of months ago. So projectsave.org, you can feel free to go and check it out. There's a lot of interactive stuff on there. So without further ado, why don't we get started? Today, I'm really happy to have with us Rebecca Topakian, she's a French Armenian photographer. And she caught my attention with a piece that she had in Aperture magazine, which is a wonderful photography magazine. And there was a piece in there that was about Rebecca and about some of her wonderful work. So why don't I introduce her and then I'll hand it over to Rebecca. Afterwards, we'll have a question and answer period. Rebecca will present for around 30 minutes and then we'll have a discussion. If you look at your screen and you go down there to the bottom bar, you'll see a Q&A. So if you click that, feel free to ask your questions there. Ideally, you can ask it there. If you get confused, just feel free to send it in the chat, okay? Rebecca Topakian is a French-Armenian artist and photographer who graduated from the École Nationale Supérieure de la Photographie of Arles in 2015. She has a background in philosophy and geography, and this informs her work where she questions the notions of identity. By exploring the in-betweens and the mythologies and fictions that sometimes are relevant with identity, she's always attempting to shed light on the crucial role it plays in our time and in everyone's lives. For Rebecca, identity is articulated in the relation between poetry, intimacy, and politics, which I think is a very true and very important combination. She has participated in many exhibitions in France and abroad. In 2017, her first book called Infra was published. It was shortlisted for the book prize of Le Rencontre de Arles. She was also shortlisted for FOAM Talent in 2019 and was a laureate recipient of the National Commission Regard du Grand Paris 2020. In 2021, she was the recipient of the Foundation d'Artistes grant and the CNAP grant for documentary photography. In 2023, so this year, her book, Dame Gulizar and Other Love Stories, will be published. So I'd like to turn it over to Rebecca. Thank you very much, Rebecca, for joining us. And
well, thank you for the invitation, and hi to everyone. So yeah, I'm Rebecca Topakian, and I consider myself as a visual artist using photography. And I don't really call myself a photographer because I can use other mediums depending on the project, even if it's mostly photography. So my work has always been focused about the concept of community and identity in the link in between the personal and the collective identity. When I started, I was more of a documentary photographer in a very classical sense of that word. And then it changed slowly. And I'm going to share my screen so I can show you the presentation. Up. Sorry. Here. Okay. So you can see it. So that was one of my first work that I did when I was in school, actually, and I was focusing on the link between the individual and the community, how oneself lose himself or themselves in this trance-like state in rave parties and parties. And that was a shift in my work because I moved from the classical documentary as we know it towards something that is more I don't know, conceptual or philosophical and not just purely documentary. But I did a selection of different works because we have only 30 minutes. And so the topic of this discussion was the link between the self and the collective, and how you can explore your identity through the conversation in between those. And as we said, I work always in between maybe poetry, intimacy, and politics. And we're going to see in my projects how I try to mix all of this in my work. So there was this project called Dame Gulizar and the Love Stories that I started in 2017. And it was a very important work to me because maybe it's my first work that I feel is completely, I don't know, like whole in a way. Wait, is it? I have to do Japan. So that was started in 2017, and it was the first time I went to Armenia. And it was something that was important because I wasn't grown in any Armenian culture, any Armenian environment, not in the language, not the food, etc. So I felt very disconnected to this and at the same time connected. And I felt the need to explore this. And I did it through my own story, or like my own family story, because the only thing that had been told to me from my Armenian family, from my grandfather and my great-grandparents, was only one story. That was the love story of my great-grandparents. So my great-grandfather, that you can see on this picture, Garabet, was a basturma maker, and he fell in love with Gulizar, who was supposedly a princess, and her parents wouldn't let them marry. So he came by night to kidnap her and marry her. And so that story, I grew up with this story that was almost mythological, or that sounds like a fairy tale story. And I found it interesting because is also very ambiguous or ambivalent, because it's this fairy tale kind of story, and at the same time it's a very traditional patriarchal thing from the Caucasus that we know, and that is not always that dreamy. And I took this love story as a thread for this whole work, trying to understand my own identity through this idea of love, desire, and longing. So I photographed, I did like casting some young Armenian men on in the streets around my friends, and also on dating apps, saying I'm a photographer and I'm looking for models. And I staged people in intimate photos, trying to stage, I would say, like fictional love stories, and multiple fictional love stories. And at the same time, exploring the landscape, exploring everything that I saw as a potential set for these fictional stories. So like working on this project was a way for me to fill the blanks of my own history, these blanks of that a lot of Armenians have in their family, like not transmitting the history or losing it and not being able to transmit it. And I filled the blanks with fiction. And what I like to do and what I tried to do in this work was to use different levels of symbolism, different levels of understanding, different lexical fields, visual lexical fields. So like you have this, some images like this one who are related to the idea of the sacred, or this one. You have other images that reminds more of geological formations and like a millenary history of the land, of the mountains. And at the same time, you have these portraits that are very intimate, also very sensual, that implicate me, that involve me as a subject in my own work. And that is something that I found very important to be involved as a subject in my work, as in documentary photography, when it's cold and very down to earth and very distant. I feel like today we've seen so much documentary that we're not very sensitive to it anymore. And when I see a new documentary work on something, if it's very distant or cold, I'm not gonna really feel engaged or involved in it. I'm just gonna feel like, okay, new information, and my brain is used to like seeing it. As you can, this is like an exhibition view, and that's how I try to show my images, like having all this kind of different lexical fields of images and symbols, and I don't give many clues for the viewer to understand it. So I'm trying to like give some work and work of imagination. It's a poetic work because you go from one wall to another, one image to another, one frame to another, and the viewer has to make their own story or to imagine it. They also have to fill blanks. Like I was saying, I was filling the blanks with my fiction, and the viewer, they have to fill the blanks too to get into the work. So that was Dame Gulizar. Also, I didn't talk about it, but I worked a lot with archives, my own family archives, and I printed my own family pictures on stones that I picked up in Armenia. Some of them are like the blue one, we all know it. I think it comes from Sevan, and it's actually glass. There's also obsidian and tuff. And I printed it in the dark room. So it was a way, symbolic way of putting back my grandfather, who immigrated to France, and his family to the land and the stones. So that's for Dame Gulizar. And I recently started a new project that is not finished actually, but I like to talk about it because it's interesting too. Especially when thinking of the link between fiction and documentary. So this word is called Il faut que les braises de Constantinople s'envolent jusqu'en Europe, which could be translated in English as the embers of Constantinople should be seen flying all the way over to Europe. It comes from a book, a novel that my grandfather, before he died, offered to all of his children. And he wrote a note at the beginning of it saying that he remembered on the 21st of April, so the day the Turks arrested the Armenian intelligentsia of Istanbul. So he remembered how they were hiding and how his mother gave some gold to an officer to save them. And by this book, it was the only way he talked about his experience. So this work I made, and I'm still doing actually in Turkey, mostly in Istanbul, but also in my great-grandparents' village. It's a work, like the original point is research about my family history. So here is the note that my grandfather wrote. It's genealogical research about my family history and looking for all this information that were lost. And at the same time, following this investigation and the thread of the investigation, it's exploring Istanbul of today and making links between the past of like Ottoman past and Young Turks past being linked with today and showing the continuity of history. These are my great-grandparents' tomb that I found after a lot of research in Istanbul. And also I'm meeting Armenians of Istanbul today and making interviews and talking. And what is interesting compared to the previous work that I showed is that when I started working and meeting these people that I interviewed, And also I went there in 2021, which was after the 2020 Artsakh War. And I realized how the consequences of state denial of the genocide is still very important and has a lot of implications today. It's sometimes I used to think, oh, maybe it's something of the past, but then I realized how Armenians are still afraid in Istanbul, how how Turkey is helping Azerbaijan and aggressing Armenia. All this is because of denial of the genocide and forgetting that Armenians existed in these lands before and all this history. So I did less fiction in that work because I felt it was such an important and difficult subject, and also because of state denial in Turkey being based on telling stories that are untrue and playing with history, playing with reality. I felt I had to be more close to facts. So what I do is mixing pictures that are very documentary, like this is a house in ruins in Talas, where my great-grandparents came from. And there's only one Armenian left in that place, in Talas. And still some people do nationalist graffitis on the ruins of this house. And so it shows some violence. It shows how in everyday life you still have this violence. These are this is one of the trees in front of Hasim Pasha, if I'm not mistaken in the name, which was a prison where the Armenians were put on the 24th of April. It's near Hagia Sophia. It's a very touristic place. And actually, these are trees where they used to hang people. And I'm trying to show this. So like when I show it, there's text in with it explaining this. This is Garo Paylan that I met, a picture of Ataturk looking at me from afar. This is one of the trees where they hanged people. And I'm trying to play with this ambivalence of this beauty of everyday life in Istanbul, because everybody's like, this is such a beautiful city, and the violence underneath. And I'm looking at the time. It's okay. I'm also using a few images that are not full of meaning as directly as the others, but more trying to convey a feeling of uneasiness or maybe uneasiness and being scared in everyday life. This dagger, for example, I was going from shops to shops looking for old Ottoman daggers because I wanted to photograph a dagger that might have been killing Armenians actually during genocide, and because of Armenians still being called remnants of the sword in Turkey. So like I'm playing again with all these symbols and different level of interpretation, but also giving a lot of information and facts with text that I don't show here, but that is going with the images. So that's a work that is still in progress, and it's quite challenging to me to find a balance in between this poetic approach that I usually have and something that is also very close to facts and that is full of information without overwhelming the viewer with information, because this is art, not a history book. Another work that I did recently called Vorta and Karmir, I did it with Topakian, who is another artist I worked with. We made a carpet based on images. So that carpet. This carpet is about the 2020 Artsakh War. Again, we are very intimately involved in this project and in this work because the 3 medallions that are in the center of this carpet are made based on images that I received during the war on Instagram in my DMs. And it was these images of torture and mutilation and beheadings and videos of, I don't know, killing people. And when I received them, I was very shocked. I was kind of traumatized. And I wanted to transform this trauma into something. And I saved these images and videos. Some people find it weird. But I didn't want these images to be like a vague memory that would haunt me. So I rather had it on my phone and remember that it's true. And I transformed it through the process of glitch. So these are these images, we can't really see them anymore. And we included it in the carpet. So these 3 images are like made from these horrible photos. And then the rest of the carpet is inspired from like traditional patterns of Armenian carpet and rugs. We made some small drawings that are inspired from the 19th century kind of drawings on carpets that were depicting the daily life and the rural life. But here it's depicting the war. So with like the computer, the house on fire, the tree on fire, etc. And most of the colors, the red is made from Vorta and Karmir, which is the red cochinilla. We made it from red cochinilla of Mexico because Vorta and Karmir is disappearing. And there's also this parallel between the disappearance of the Vorta and Karmir, which is very ancient and has been inhabiting Armenian lands for a long time, and the ethnic cleansing of Armenians of Karabakh. We made a book, but I might not have time to show you now, documenting the process. And then the most recent work called Dual Nationality, that was work I made for Aperture. So the idea was that I had a commission work for Aperture that I had to do in a very short time and where I was, which is Paris. So I decided to work on myself because I couldn't travel or go somewhere else or do a very in-depth documentary work. And I was inspired by a book, actually, that is called Double Nationalité, which means dual nationality, written by a writer called Nina Yargekov. And the story is a woman wakes up in an airport in Charles de Gaulle in Paris, and she has amnesia. And she opens her bag, and she finds 2 passports, 2 sets of keys, 2 phones, 2 wallets. She wonders if she's a spy or a prostitute, and she starts investigating about herself from these objects. So I followed the same idea. I investigated about myself with objects that I found in my home. And I try to keep the same tone that is funny, humoristic, and not serious, because all my work is usually very serious and sad. This one is more funny. I try also to make fun of myself. So I take photos of all these objects, like the books I read in French and the books I read in Armenian. And I did these self-portraits where I dress up as myself. So all the clothes, I found them in my own, apart from the traditional dress, they're my own clothes. The idea is not to do a perfect dress up. So I'm not using, I don't know, wigs, extreme makeup, or hiring a stylist for the clothes. it's more doing this very DIY, so that it's very imperfect, showing the studio setup, and the setup itself is not very perfect. Everything seems a bit uneasy in that way. Like, I didn't want it to seem good and perfect and fitting. It always seems like I'm not in the right clothes, or I'm not in the right place, and that's the thing I'm trying to show. So some of these are real me's, some of them are possible me's, like someone I could be, someone I'm a bit like, someone that I am a little, or someone that people expect me to be. Like, when I was a kid, everyone wanted me to do Armenian traditional dance, and I didn't understand. I found it was like I wanted to do hip hop or something, like everyone. So like, this one is clearly something that people expected me to be. Also me as a patriot, that I might be a little, but not as much as this. Me as Kiartu, a little bit too. These are my two sets of keys. And also I collected screenshots of Instagram, of this targeted ads. And it's very funny because the algorithm from Instagram should be very precise, but it doesn't target me very well. So when I come back to France, I get these ads that advertise for buying fake papers, as if I was an undocumented migrant from elsewhere, aka Armenia. When I go to Armenia, I also have these ads for undocumented migrants in Armenia. Also have this very racist ad for no surgery, an ad for getting army training, and it says, is it this one or it's another one? Yeah, that the makeup brush won't shoot, so you should start shooting. So yeah, I think I managed to be in time. And we can start discussing.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you so much. It's definitely but by the way, of course, the irony of that last thing you showed with the racist plastic surgery thing there, the doctor, the advertisement is from an Armenian doctor.
Yeah.
So it's like, so that's a whole other kind of thing. So thank you so much. So everyone, feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A, which is at the bottom of the screen, and I'll share that with Rebecca. If you get confused, you can also write in the chat, and we'll try to look at that as well. It's interesting, Rebecca, even before, I mean, I'd seen some of these photos already, and I had kind of read about you, and I read the text that you had sent over to me. And it's interesting, there's so much that resonates with me as someone who, yeah, that idea of the dual nationality, where in my case, being an American, having never been to Armenia before I ended up moving there, but I had never visited before I moved, and not really kind of growing up kind of Armenian, but also very, I don't know, like rebellious, or not really, just two parallel kind of identities, I guess, in a way. And I like the phrase that you used it a couple times, kind of filling the blanks.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that, because that's really interesting to me from the perspective of as an artist. I mean, So with you in photography, and when I think about when I do my music or when I write poetry, that's an interesting concept that I think somewhere here in your text you say, I want to be careful so that I don't make a book that's 1,000 pages long. Because
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's interesting, groups like Armenians, I think there are some groups in the world like Armenians where so few people truly understand the very complicated and dynamic historical context,
Mhm.
that I think when you're trying to be creative, it's really difficult to utilize imagination and playfulness and myth and all kinds of things that normally you would use in art,
Mhm.
while also trying to be sensitive to the fact that people don't really know what Armenians are, and there's all these complicated historical facts. And so could you maybe say a little bit more about that idea of like using your work to help? You're not filling the blanks, I think is what you're saying. You're trying to instigate a collective filling of the blanks. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah. I mean, of course, like for me personally, the practice of art is made to fill the blanks. I mean,
Mhm,
for I do it because I feel the need to fill the blanks.
mhm,
But also when I do my work and I show it, I think it's important to give space to the viewers
mhm,
so that do their own work. And
mhm,
it was like the big challenge when I was working on this work I'm doing in Turkey, because I'm aiming for a public that is not Armenian and maybe not Turkish, so like
yeah,
probably Western French, maybe because I'm in France, and then
right,
Western in general. So people who don't know anything, maybe they know about the genocide and that's it, but they don't know
right,
about, I don't know, Young Turks and Atatürk and Erdogan today and the
yeah,
Kemalist and all these things.
yeah,
And I read a lot and etc. And I don't want to uh, hand over all this information because people would be overwhelmed. They wouldn't understand anything. So
mhm,
what I'm trying to do is to give a few information, give a few images that would give them a feeling of uneasiness or discomfort, or at least being curious, something that has so many blanks that they have to work. So like I like to make people work. Someone
mhm,
said that to me once. Yeah, a friend said that in my books, I'm like not giving anything to the viewer. Like they have to
mhm,
do a lot of work.
mhm, mhm,
And that's and I think that's a way like I give a lot of myself in my work. Like I show a lot of me to the people, like I showed my ID. I
mhm,
show my ID, I show my passport, I will show photos of my family or my family tree.
mhm,
And by this gesture of giving so much of myself and my intimate history to the viewer, in exchange, I expect that maybe they're going to feel involved by my
mhm,
trust and themselves try to work.
mhm,
And I think it can somehow it works. And I had this good experience of giving a talk recently in Guadeloupe to a class of students who are not students in art or photography. They're just students in different departments. And I was showing this work and I was saying this thing about the dagger, the word remnants of the sword, or the story of the tree where they hanged people. And the
mhm,
students, they were very young, they're like 18 or 19.
mhm,
And they were looking at their phone at the same time and Googling it. And they were, what? I've never heard about this. And they kept the tree and they were like literally Googling Armenian genocide. And that's
mhm,
well then that's my hope, like people might have a feeling from my show, from my exhibition or
mhm,
my books.
mhm,
I hope they feel something different things, beautiful things, uneasiness also, and that they're gonna make their own story and look for information on the side.
Right, right. So we have a question from someone who's asking, so so you've gotten interested in learning the Armenian language, which you don't really know that well, from what you told me. Yeah. And you've also kind of really created a footprint in Armenia where you basically go there every couple of months. Yeah. So part of the question is, what has that been like? And then part of that question also is going to Turkey. How has that been? Have you felt safe, or what has that experience kind of been in general?
And the first part was about going to Armenia.
Yeah, kind of
Yes.
learning Armenian, and doing research there, or kind
Mm.
of establishing this frequent connection that going there. Yeah.
I mean, the frequent connection between France and Armenia is really good, except that I do feel like this character in this book who wonders if she's a spy or whatever.
Mhm.
Sometimes I feel like I'm a double agent in my life, you know, like having two parallel lives.
Mhm.
And of course, something that Armenian experience a lot these last years is being always worried about war and the disappearance of our country, or what is left of our country, and not being able to share it with people around us. That is something tricky. And about Turkey, it was complicated because I went to Turkey with the best of intentions of, I don't know, making peace with history and everything. But this is clearly also a country that is uh, psychologically struggling, I think, because of the denial, not only of the genocide, but of their whole history.
Mhm.
And I had a feeling that that there's the country is psychologically not sane, like,
Mhm.
and sometimes I felt like it made me crazy for that reason. um
Yeah.
and that's also why I haven't finished this work, because I felt like I needed some time off
Yeah.
Turkey.
Yeah. It's
um
interesting you say that. I think this is something that maybe doesn't get talked about in, like, publicly as much,
mhm,
but in my time living in Armenia and then being in Turkey a number of times, um, I I I actually felt like both places could make me feel kind of insane, or like there are different psycho-spiritual tensions and contradictions in both countries. And I think, and I'm not trying to equate them in any way, obviously, but what I'm saying though is that I think that that's something that's not often really just talked about or explored publicly, and I think
mhm,
that's one of the things I really like about your work, is that you're doing something that I think is really rare in work, in any kind of creative work that has anything to do with anything Armenian. That kind of creative work, I find, tends to be pretty kind of on the nose. It's either patriotic, or it's sentimental, or
mhm,
there's some kind of cliche, or it's, unfortunate. I don't know. I find it to be rather narrow oftentimes.
mhm,
And I think that excludes the humanity of it. That, Armenians are people like anybody else. It's a country like any other country. And it has its very unique set of wonderful things, and it's got some not so wonderful things, and
mhm,
that there is a reality in the day-to-day lives of people in that part of the world, not just in Armenia, but just in that part of the world. I think there are just all sorts of tensions and I don't know, things that are trying to get sorted out. And of course, that exists everywhere in the world, but just in different
Yeah.
ways, right? But it's just interesting that you say that, because I definitely felt that as well, that on both sides, the border is closed, but on both sides of that border, there are just a lot of very, very complicated, deep emotional, psychological, all kinds of things that are going on. Connected to that, I had a kind of a follow-up question for you. With the Artsakh War and the kind of catastrophe that's unfolded with that, and I think you mentioned too that it became extra tricky because your work and your approach seems to be a lot about, I want the viewer to do some work. I want the viewer to fill certain things in and to kind of play, that there's some whimsy and playfulness and poetry, as you said, right? And then because I totally understand that feeling of like, now it's a major catastrophe, a major catastrophe that's unfolded in front of our eyes, and that's taken a lot of lives and people's homes and land and just all that stuff. How do you reconcile that now, where on the one hand now you feel like, oh, it's more urgent, I want there to be facts, I want people to understand this tragedy and this injustice, but I also want to be true to myself and the way that I approach my art and photography.
Mhm.
um can you maybe say a little bit more about like what you what that's been like?
Um, well, I guess my work is still not um, linked to very actual events, apart from the rug
Mhm,
that is about the war, and not that much about the war, but about the images
mhm,
of the war that circulated.
mhm,
Um, but for example, when I do my work in Turkey, somehow I um, I want to do something that would help people understand the situation of um, Armenians in Armenia
mhm,
with Turkey today.
mhm,
But I do it in a way that I'm trying to show the roots of it, um, the roots that are not only, I mean, the genocide, of course, but also the the years after that under Ataturk, and then also how everything has been hidden and in denial, and how people are educated in denial. So like I'm not that much, working on very actual and
right.
hot topics, very far from reportage or this kind of things.
Mhm,
But still, I think like to understand everything that is happening today,
mhm,
we need a lot of background history, and not only, um, not only the beginning of the 20th century, but politics in Turkey today, and
mhm.
and,
Right,
like a
right.
whole set of information that
Mhm,
most people lack.
mhm. Um, Sharon, one of our participants here, Sharon Bazarian, was asking a question about what sort of photographers inspire you, other photographers. And it's funny because I was, the first time I saw that image of from Dual Nationality, I saw two or three images, and I couldn't help it. The first thing I thought about was Cindy Sherman
Yeah.
a little bit. So I'm wondering, like, what kind of photographers do you get inspired by, or do you?
Mm, it's very hard for me to point at specific photographers.
Mhm,
There's so many,
mhm,
and usually a lot of people that are around me. I mean, friends and who
mhm,
are like, I don't know, in the photo scene. in France or elsewhere.
Mhm.
I guess one of the photographers that was the most important for me was Wolfgang Tillmans. Even though he's not doing documentary at all, but his approach of everyday beauty in objects and small things and the details and the bodies has been very important for me. I mean, when I was a student and I discovered Wolfgang Tillmans, it was
Interesting. Yeah. I in I've been reading a lot lately about Vivian Meyer and Robert Frank. And not that I see that necessarily in your photographs, but especially with Vivian Meyer, yeah, there is something about taking the everyday and revealing something sublime going on in the everyday. And I think that's where, like, as a poet, I definitely see that in some of your images, where that's exactly what poetry is trying to do. You're using everyday words, but suddenly you're hoping that when you make a poem, it's going to reveal a sort of estrangement. It's going to reveal something uncanny or a bit of the sublime that's beneath the everyday language that we use, you know? And I definitely see that. I, I was gonna ask, well, actually, one of our other participants, Alan, was asking about dual identities. And I think this is an interesting question that probably a lot of us feel. He's asking, do you feel in both your identities, in each one, do you sometimes feel like an outside observer? So like when you're French Rebecca, is there a part of you that kind of doesn't feel like you totally belong, or that you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this all started as I decided to take the citizenship, Armenian citizenship, learn the language, and get an apartment in Yerevan after the war. It was a sudden decision because many of my friends, or like several of my friends, were fighting at the front line, and I wanted to be close to them. And I think it, I don't know, made a shift in my identity. Like probably before the war, I mean, after the war, I started sometimes speaking about French people who, I don't know, like white French people. I would say the French, and by saying that, exclude myself from it. I never said that before the war. Like that's something that appeared at that moment. Probably the experience of the war in Armenia that I couldn't share with people made this gap in between me and the others.
Maybe connected to maybe one of our last questions, maybe as we start to wrap up. I'm curious. So far, a lot of our conversation has kind of the lens has been kind of toward Armenia, kind of, you know. And you know, when I lived in Armenia, almost from day one, but especially by the time I left Armenia 7 years later, I actually felt much more reconnected and re-energized back to the diaspora. Actually, I never felt I had lots of friends. I had wonderful students, and as you say, I mean, unfortunately, I had students who died in the war, and obviously like personal connections. But in terms of whatever we want to call Armenianness or whatever that is. I didn't feel, I actually felt more a reaffirmation of how strongly I feel that I am a diasporan, and that's what's very important to me in terms of
Mhm.
my own sense of who I am and my identity. And the feeling that maybe for 30 years there's been such a focus on Armenia, understandably. Of course, I'm not, I understand why why that is, but at the same time, especially now after this war, after the number of years, that I wonder what's going on with the diaspora. I mean, most Armenians are not in Armenia, and most are not moving to Armenia or even visiting Armenia.
Mhm.
So I wonder, from your perspective, now that you have this connection with Armenia, how does that affect your connection as a French Armenian, and or to the diaspora, or uh, has that been something that's come up at all, or?
No, I was never really involved in the Armenian the community in France.
Mhm,
So somehow I discovered my Armenianness surrounded by Ayastansis, like Armenians from Armenia.
mhm.
Um, and maybe that's why I can enjoy living partially there.
Right. Yeah. No, and I think you're right. Yes, I agree. I agree. I think if you're someone that, even if you've never been to Armenia, if you have some more visceral diasporic
Hmm.
DNA, I guess, that's a different experience going
Yeah.
to Armenia, because you're either going to go there and just kind of become very patriotic and nostalgic and all that kind of stuff, which is fine, or you might go there and actually get very, it's like cognitive dissonance. And then you kind of realize that, oh, wait, actually, this is a very different culture in many ways. I mean, I am just more connected to my diasporic identity. And actually, those are kind of different things in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
and that's okay. So yeah, that's very interesting. So, one of the last questions I had for you too is about language, Rebecca, because you said, so you're, what I asked you, whether you speak Armenian, you answered in Eastern Armenian, and you said that you're learning Armenian. So that tells me that you're learning Eastern Armenian, not
Mhm.
Western Armenian,
Yes.
which is interesting. But also, what has that been like to actually kind of learn the language? Is that resonating with you kind of on an artistic level yet, or what is that like?
Mm, yeah, I mean, I think it's uh, I mean, usually everything I do in my life ends up related to my artistic practice, because I involved everything that I like in my practice, or I don't know. um, so yes, I guess it's um, I haven't included anything with language yet, but though even like in this dual nationality series, I was writing my name, the sentence, my name is Rebecca Topakian in French and then in Armenian. And for me, it's there's something very beautiful and interesting on playing on these different languages and alphabets. And also when I was working on Dame Gulizar and I was um, thinking about the book I'm going to make and everything, I was thinking how my grandfather, for example, um, spoke French and maybe English, Turkish and Armenian. And
Mm.
you know how at that time, like a lot of people, they wrote Turkish with Armenian alphabet,
Right. They use the
or the
Ottoman
country,
script,
yeah.
and they were, yeah, exactly. Right.
And also, yeah, he was born where people still used Ottoman Turkish, which
Right.
means Arabic alphabet.
Right.
So I really like, and I think it's very interesting, um, going from one alphabet to another, um, and trying to understand all these that are like at play in there.
Yeah. 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 Um, Manug had a question here that I find interesting, and it reminded me of something I wanted to ask you. So he's asking about kind of the physical aspect. A number of your photos, there's a physicality to them, to the subject in the photo.
Mhm.
And he's specifically talking about hands, if maybe you've ever kind of been, if you're ever kind of the hands of a subject, if
Mm.
that's ever a thing for you. And to follow up with that, I was curious because you kind of just mentioned, and it just kind of slipped through the cracks, but I wrote it down. You said in Armenia, you were asking people to sit for you, right? As
Mhm.
to model for you. And you're like, I asked people, dating apps, this, that. So, and having lived there, I'm very curious, how did people, what were the reactions you got? I mean, were they just like, whatever, sure, I'll do that? Or did they kind of get what you were doing? Or what
It,
were some of the reactions?
it was interesting. I think part of this work, exploring my Armenian identity, is also, and it's not, I mean, I call this work after the name of my great grandmother. So I guess there's also exploring this idea of being a woman, Armenian woman. And of course, Armenia is very patriarchal,
Right. Yeah.
getting better, but
Yeah.
uh, it
Yeah. I
is.
mean, yeah, Armenian, I think I have no problem saying that the Armenian men in Armenia they couldn't be more different than the Armenian men I grew up with in the diaspora. It's a very different, you know, it's different. Yeah.
Yeah, so it
Yeah. Yeah.
was something. I mean, I photographed friends and everything, and then I was looking for specific physical traits and everything, and I decided it was take too long if I waited to meet people by chance. So I went on dating apps
Yeah.
after someone suggested it to me. So I
Yeah.
wrote like I'm a photographer and looking for models. Of
Mhm.
course, a lot of people just thought that was an occasion to date a French girl.
That's
Uh,
yeah, right. That's what I was wondering. I mean,
but I had really good surprises, and there was. It's really interesting as a woman in Armenia in 2018 because I think it's better now.
mhm.
But for example, I met this guy. Now he's a friend. I met this guy to take photos. We never met before. He came to my apartment. He was topless, and I was
Right.
piling fruits on his body to take
Right. Right.
photos.
That's amazing.
and and I really I think it was very interesting for me in that project also.
Mhm.
um I mean, I don't want to use keywords too easily, but it was somehow empowering.
Right. 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 Yeah,
um
I mean, I'm just curious because, yeah, I mean, obviously my experience, well, not obviously, I guess, but my experience there is more, whether it's romantically or whatever, is more with Armenian women. So I'm just curious from a Western woman's perspective, and considering how kind of it's a very kind of macho patriarchal thing going on there. So I was very curious about how that went. And did you also deal with women models?
no, it was
Or
only men,
only men? Okay.
because it was like me and my fictional love stories.
Oh, right, right, right. Okay. Okay.
But no, the only women I photographed that I met were always with other people. So it was maybe
Mm,
like a group photo or couple
right,
photo.
right, right, right. Um, Thank you so much, Rebecca. If there are no more questions, thank you everyone for your lovely comments. I'm glad you all got to join us and enjoy uh, conversations on photography today. I'm so pleased that we got to have Rebecca Topakian with us. Rebecca, thank you so much. I hope that we can kind of stay in touch, and hopefully one day you'll come out towards Boston sometime
Yeah.
and check out our archives. And also, and I do want to say that I think it's very important that your work, you mention archives a lot. You make use of your family archives, going to Turkey, doing different kinds of research. And I think that's so, it, 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 it amplifies your art and your ideas so beautifully and so interestingly. And I think also on the broader level, I think it goes to show why archives are so important and why photography archives are so important. Because I think in the Armenian world, it's funny because a lot of people get it, but sometimes they don't. You know, why save these photos, or why, you know, I don't even know who's in these photos, who's going to care, you know. But it is important because it's a larger fabric, it's a mosaic that's telling the narrative of contemporary Armenian culture and history around the world. And so to see people like you doing this great artistic work that draws on archives, I think is really fantastic. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you so
I know
much.
it's late in France, so thank you very much for staying up. Thank you all very much. Our next conversations on photography is going to be later in March. I think it's March 24th or 21st, but we'll send out a notice. It's going to be with the historian David Lowe, who's just published a book on photography in the Ottoman Empire and the relation to Armenians. So should be a very interesting talk as well. Thank you all very much. Feel free to go to our website, projectsave.org, and check out all that we do. And please support us if you're able. Thank you so much again. Merci, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, and
All right.
thank you, everyone.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.